Hold on a second. Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome to the Rant, everybody. This is John, and that is Evan, and
Hello.
we are here to entertain you.
Unlike the team that we're covering.
Very much unlike the team that we're covering, sadly.
Yay.
But yet here we are covering them for some reason.
Yeah, sort of. Apologies for the distraction. I just posted an article, and so now I'm sharing it to Facebook and trying to think of how to caption that there in a manner such that it will piss off a lot of people, just because
the maximum number of people.
Mostly because, and listen, understandably, sarcasm does not always play well, kind of in social media in general when you can't get the inflection, but like Facebook in general, and I don't know if it's just a Cubs fan thing. Probably not. It's probably most fans, but like, you want to talk about people who have zero sense of humor whatsoever. Boy, is it Facebook fans. There is just, whoo, there's no way jokes go over like a lead balloon, man. But, and I'm not even like, the way I'm going to say this makes it sound like I'm intentionally kind of being clickbaity or whatever. That's not it. But the unintended circumstance of that is, like, if people get pissed off and then they comment and they engage, and that actually then drives that algorithm on Facebook, and it'll put it in front of more people because it sees that this post is getting engagement, which is actually, and we'll talk about regular stuff here for a while, but what's funny is, like, somebody came to the site and posted on the site calling one of Mike's rundown pieces trash writing and clickbait and all that stuff. And I'm like, and I had kind of, you start, if you throw around accusations like that, like, I'm going to get pissed because, again, we've discussed this before, but clickbait is like when you have a scantily clad woman in the picture for the article, and then it's like, how to increase your testosterone or something, and it's just some bogus, where it might even be like, these stars of the 80s, where are they now? Whatever, right? Like, that's clickbait. But when you put out a headline that describes exactly what is then in the actual content of the article, that's not clickbait. It's being descriptive in order to get people to read it, which is kind of the point.
Yeah.
But I'm like,
we do want people to read the content.
I was like, dude, you saw the headline. You came here to read it. Like, that's the point. You're a Cubs fan, whatever. He's like, well, I didn't seek it out. It was put in my time. Like, if we only ever read exactly things that we sought out directly, 90% of the stuff that's out there wouldn't exist, right? Like, the whole point is that it is serving up to you things that it thinks, the algorithm, that is, in big terms. And then eventually the guy came around like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I understand. I was having a bad day, and I took it out on you guys. I'm like,
how does that even work? Like, I don't even
weird.
understand that. Why would you get on Facebook and just start, like, rattling people? And
this wasn't even on Facebook.
Things?
It was actually on our website. Like, he saw it on Facebook, came to the website, and commented.
And then left a comment
on
there.
The site about how it's clickbait and trash. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? It's like, just because you don't agree. And here's what it normally comes down to. They read something that they don't agree with, or, again, understandably, like, my sense of humor is not one that's going to go over well with boomers, or just, certain folks maybe aren't going to get it, right? And so if they don't get it or they don't like it, then it's clickbait and it's trash, which is just like, you didn't serve to me exactly what I wanted. This is trash. You suck. Like, I don't know, or maybe we just don't agree, and that's okay. Anyway, given the current state of the Cubs, there's going to be a lot of that, because
there will be.
There's disagreement to be had on how they're doing what they're doing.
But true. Yeah, the Cubs are a bit of a mess. They just dropped 3 out of 4 against the Pirates, a team that we thought the Cubs were going to be coming into the season. I think the general consensus amongst others, including ourselves, was that the Cubs were probably going to be the third place team in the NL Central. Well, it's turning out that the Cubs are battling Cincinnati to be the fifth place team in the NL Central, and they're right now 26-44, a 371 win percentage, which is really bad, and they're on pace to win 60 games. It's been a while since they've and it's been a while since they've been on that bad of a pace, but it's also just kind of, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't see. I'm stumbling here because there's so many different emotions. Yeah. But at the end of the day, listen, when Theo first came in, it was, I think he communicated what he was doing very well. I think everybody in baseball knew what he was trying to do. I think the difference there is that, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Evan, but it didn't feel like the Cubs really made any, they didn't have guys to trade and get, these young prospects for. And I think that's a kind of the difference this time around, is the Cubs had a core, and they still do have several players on their team that are desirable to others like Wilson Contreras to trade. And so I think that's a big difference between kind of this rebuild and the rebuild that Theo conducted, was that Theo could be a little bit more forthright and honest about what he was doing, because it didn't involve making trades with other teams trying to get prospects. Whereas it feels like this time around, because that is the case, Jed kind of is saying things, and it's kind of... it's like whatever he says doesn't make sense. He continues to repeat himself. It's like continues to talk about the resources that they have, but don't deploy. And it's almost like you want him to be quiet, but in the same sense, when he's quiet, everybody's like, why hasn't Jed said anything? So it's like, it doesn't, I'm not really sure how he should handle the situation, but I do know that he's confusing everybody with his comments. And it's a little frustrating to kind of watch this rebuild unfold. It's frustrating to hear them say this isn't a rebuild. I mean, it's like getting slapped in the face and the person saying, I'm not slapping you. I'm not slapping you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so the issue, like before, they were bad, and they basically came out and said they were going to be bad. Now at the time, and we can... I kind of brought this up on the last one, and I can get into it a little bit more because it's part of what I wrote about today. Now, at least moving forward, this upcoming draft, they're locked into. The next draft and subsequent drafts after that will employ a lottery. Well, at least for the next 4 years after it. Well, 5 years, I guess, will employ a draft lottery as laid out by the CBA. But when you look at the guys who they were trading before, essentially what it was, and they've tried to do that this year, or they did try, whether it be Wade Miley, Drew Smiley, David Robertson, Michael Givens, guys like that. So, Paul Maholm is an example, or some of these other guys. They'd sign a pitcher to a 1-year deal, a pitcher who they thought, could maybe bounce back, who they could deploy in that fashion, and then flip him. But, at the time, things were a little bit different. And then what they were doing is trying to find undervalued pieces, right? So when they traded off, and when they were able to bring back Jake Arrieta and Pedro Strop, right? But the difference there, the guys who they were bringing back were not 18, 19, 20-year-old prospects who you don't have an expectation of contributing to the team for another 4 to 5 years, if ever, right? Because that's such a crapshoot. They were getting guys who were either current major league players who they thought were being underutilized or whose talents were not being brought out by their team, so they could flip that. Because, when they brought Arrieta over, right, so we're talking 14, right, or that he came in and was pretty good with, had kind of a rebirth there. And then 15, obviously we saw, he was injured. Was it the start of 14 when he was hurt? Like, he came over in 13, right? And then 14, he was kind of hurt at the start, and then did really well. 15, we all know, was the most incredible pitching performance we've seen in many decades. 16 was still pretty good, right? But the point is that they traded for guys, and Strop, very similar, one of the best relievers in Cubs history, even though a lot of people still hate the guy because he wore his hat to the side, or whatever, or occasionally would give up a big home run. But that's the difference is they were trading for players who could contribute immediately. Even though the team was bad, right? That 14 team was not any good. 13, they weren't any good. But they knew that the timeline was going to be coming up pretty soon. And so when you see them go out and trade, again, we don't know what's going to happen at this deadline. And it's entirely possible that if they do flip Smiley, Miley, some of these others, and maybe they will find a desperate team that's willing to part with someone who's on the cusp of major league readiness. That will signal a few different things. But if they go out and we see the same types of moves that we saw with Darvish, Baez, Bryant, Rizzo, then that's a very, very clear sign that this team is not looking to compete. And again, as I mentioned, the draft is another one, right? So if they are able, and it certainly looks like they're trying to get the best possible odds at this point, like I think wins are, I don't want to say undesirable. I think they only want as many wins as it takes to keep people interested in showing up to Wrigley Field. They don't want to actually win and chance to give themselves a chance at falling too far from those percentages. They can get a top draft pick, right? Top 5, top 6, possibly number 1, right? But even then, that pick is not someone who's going to contribute to your team for another 3 to 4 years, depending on where he is in the timeline, right? So I don't see anything happening right now. There are no extensions, right? Wilson Contreras, best catcher in baseball, best hitting catcher in baseball /DH. Ian Happ ranks first among all left fielders. First in batting average, first in on-base percentage. He's up near the top in slugging. Somehow nobody's voting for him for the outfield, which is insane to me for the All-Star game.
Because nobody watches the Cubs. There's nobody who pays any attention to anyone on the Cubs.
And he is actually having, for as good as he has been across all major leagues, like it's a really quiet, excellent season for him, right? Because they're so bad. And that's what's unfortunate. And a lot of Cubs fans still think the guy sucks for some reason. But he's only got another year left. If they don't extend, like that's the guy you extend. Because he's not. What's Ian Happ going to command? $50 million, $60 million? I mean, it's maybe more than that. I mean, it depends on the timing, but like, he's not a super young guy. He's not somebody and he will be coveted, but he doesn't do anything so particularly well that another team is going to go give him a $150 million contract, right? That's the guy you should be extending, but they're not. And by not extending him and not extending Contreras and perhaps trading for another bunch of young players who aren't going to contribute, they are clearly telling us when Hoyer then says, which we back that up against, and I apologize for this rambling, and I promise I'll wrap this up pretty soon, but when Hoyer says he talks about acquiring prospect currency and then you have financial currency to spend. Well, they're not spending either of those right now. He says the money will be there when the time is right. He says that they're building a core, which they clearly do not have right now. And if you trade off the two primary parts of that core, you're even further away from having that established. So when you talk about they'll spend money when the time is right, the only thing anybody can reasonably look at and deduce from that is that we're talking another, at least one more season beyond this one before that time is right, because there's no way they'll have a core in place, barring extensions, to go and spend that money this offseason. And that's really, really troublesome, because now we're talking about 2 very bad years in a row. Last year was awful. This year's going to be worse. It could be worse than 2012. Like you said, they're on pace for 60 wins. This could be the tie with the third worst season in franchise history. Maybe the worst if they.
Yeah, I think the last time they finished.
They're doing this with those 2 All-Stars.
Yeah, the last time
if those guys are gone, they're horrible.
The last time they finished under 60 games was in 1966, and I think they had 54
wins
like 60,
that
season.
63 and 66 or something like that. They were 59 and 102 in both of those,
and
or 103.
59 and 103.
I think it was
and then 59 and 103 both years. 62 and 66.
62. That's it. So
that's a long time ago. When you start talking about things like that, you don't ever want to reference anything like that, breaking a record from that long ago, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because it means that you're historically bad or you're historically good, and historically good is a good thing. But the 108-year thing was cute while it was there, but it's not really something you want to be talking about either. It is very troublesome. And here's the thing: is that it's such a huge gamble when you start talking about prospects and when you start talking about trying to build an organization just simply from prospects. And that's all they're doing right now. And they got lucky to the extent that Kyle Schwarber panned out and Javier Baez panned out at that time. And Chris Bryant was as good as he was. You know, I mean, it's not very often that you can have that many prospects. And I mean, I'll even throw Addison Russell in there, although none of us really like him, but he was still a very good player at the time. And it's not very often you have all these young guys come together and hit so well at the big league level. It's so rare.
Mm-hmm.
And for the Cubs to think they're going to do that again it's unreasonable. It's completely unreasonable. And that's where, like, trading away Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ, you're breaking it down to the studs. And the thing is it's unlikely you can rebuild it the way they think they can rebuild it, because I think they've got this recency bias based on what had happened, in 2015, 16. I think it's such a huge risk. I don't see it playing out the way they think it's going to play out. Let's put it that way.
I'm just sorry. I'm just looking at the comments and trying to understand.
You know better than that.
I know. But Tom, did you say the Cubs were going to sweep Pittsburgh?
I think what I said, I did not say that. I think what I said was that this would be a good time for the Cubs to sweep Pittsburgh. We were looking at 4 young starters, and it would be a good preview of the future if the Cubs did come out and play well. But they didn't. They actually didn't play. Let's get into that.
Well, hold on. I'm trying to wrap my head around that, because they had lost to there's no way in hell I would say this Cubs team was going to sweep anybody. I'm reasonably sure.
No, neither of us said that.
Pretty sure it said it'd be a split, but anyway, and it's in Berg. It's Pittsburgh. So it's not Berg, because that's an entirely different spelling. Anyway, continue.
So let's talk about the games. Monday's game was a complete and utter disaster. Caleb Killian, he's now 0-2 with a 10.32 ERA. He only went 2 1/3 innings, 5 walks. I have to tell you, I mean, if we go back to David Ross's comments back when it seemed very apparent that Caleb Killian should have been called up, and it felt like Ross really shouldn't have just made any comments whatsoever. And instead, he said that Caleb Killian wasn't ready to come up to the big leagues. And I think there's a big, huge, baseball, they say, is 90% mental. And it really is. And if Caleb Killian doesn't believe that David Ross and other members of the organization don't believe in him 100%, there's a little bit of doubt in his mind, and he comes up to the big leagues, that doubt is going to stay there. It is. It's just these people, these are human beings we're dealing with. And it really feels like, I mean, what we've seen from Killian is not anything like he's done at any other level. And you can say that big league batters are more disciplined. You can say whatever you want to say, but he's not pitching nearly as effectively as he has basically his entire professional career prior to being brought up to the big leagues. And that was on the heels of the comment from David Ross saying that Caleb Killian isn't ready. And then suddenly, in a very short time after that, he's up there. And that felt like it was just kind of like they didn't have a choice. They had, players on the injured reserve. It was just a situation that you don't really want if you're trying to bring a young player and give him some confidence, especially in his major league debut. And to me, that's what Killian's performance feels like, is he has this doubt that's been planted in his mind. It's turned into a weed. He definitely needs to now go back down to the minors. And I feel like it's a mismanagement when it comes to how he was brought up.
Yeah. And I don't even agree that he needs to go back down, because I mean, what is that? Then that's, again, he's not really learning anything different. He could dominate down there. I mean, maybe he goes down and gets some more confidence back, whatever. What we're seeing from him at the major league level, though, is so uncharacteristic of him. He doesn't walk batters like this. And here's the other problem, though, is a lot of it is created, again, in his own mind. And a lot of his pitches are very uncompetitive, right? It's like, it's not as if we're talking about seeing Angel Hernandez back there calling pitches incorrectly. Like, Killian's throwing some terrible pitches, but man, the defense behind him has been ass. Like, can we talk about Jonathan VR? I mean, VR had a couple of plays, and the problem with VR is not even like, he actually had one that was the little leagueiest error I've seen in forever. A ball was hit right at him, and he just couldn't even move it. It was just like caromed off his glove and went it. He had another play where he couldn't get the ball out of his glove for a double play. PJ Higgins has been fine, but I think it was Higgins who was back there. There was a passed ball. Originally it had been called a wild pitch, got changed to a pass ball. So, like, Killian is being hurt badly. And the thing is, like, he is capable of getting a bunch of strikeouts, but he throws a lot of strikes, right? A lot of the pitchers throw a lot of strikes. Justin Steele gets a ton of grounders. The Cubs defense is shit. And so how many of these times are these pitchers creating what should be outs? They're getting soft contact. They're getting balls on the ground, and they're not getting converted into outs. And how many of those then come back? Because I think it was the one – was it the one yesterday when VR couldn't turn the double play and there was a home run right after that, right?
Yeah.
So Killian's being hurt by that. Again, hurting himself quite a bit, but I would just like to see him – because I talked about this before he got called up, and I said – he's probably going to take his lumps. He's probably going to get knocked around. He's going to have some issues, but I'd rather have him have to overcome those and figure out how to do that at the major league level with the major league coaching and the information they have up there than to send him back to AAA, and then be like, oh, yeah, and like you said, hey, we're not bringing him up. Oh, crap, all these guys got hurt. Well, okay, shoot, we got to go back on our word. Now we got to call him up. All right, he's going to stay up, well, until these guys get healthy again. And, you're not good enough. And then once we trade all these guys, then you can come back. You're not coming back because you earned it. You're coming back because of other circumstances that are outside of your control. And, I hope that he can continue to overcome this because he does have the talent. The way this roster is broken down, literally and figuratively, like as you look at it and break it down, and then as they have continued to get hurt, it has, man, it's been tough. Ugh.
Well, and that's the thing is that their defense, they had an error on Monday. They had 2 errors on Tuesday. They had 3 errors on Wednesday, and they had 4 errors on Thursday. That's not how it's supposed to work. So they have 9 total errors 10 total errors in a 4-game series. The Pirates had none. And the Pirates have a young team. They don't have really any veterans on their team whatsoever.
They just called up 2 guys to make their debuts against the Cubs, and both of them they didn't shove because they weren't pitchers. But Bly Madris and O'Neill Cruz. O'Neill Cruz is massive.
Yeah, he is a shortstop. It's so weird that he's a shortstop.
Yeah, it is really an odd look to see. But then, they're calling these guys up, and here's the difference: the Pirates suck. They don't spend a bunch of money, and I don't. The way they run their organization is really shameful. But when you watch that series and you're looking at these guys who they called up, and the Cubs have Chris Morel, we saw Nelson Velasquez a little bit make a tremendous slide in yesterday's game. But as I watched those 2 teams, I was just struck by, like, the Cubs just felt like they were kind of going through the motions. They looked a little blah. And the Pirates looked like a hungry team that was out there just trying to go for it. And they're still not good, but there were different feels to the 2 teams.
When I
watched them play.
Better than the Cubs. There's that. Although I don't think that's really saying anything. I don't think anybody's going around saying, hey, we're better than the Cubs, because I don't think that really gets you anywhere. The Cubs are ranked 24th in defense per Fangraphs. And what's really killing them is the home runs. They've given up 99 home runs, which is the most in Major League Baseball. And it's just, you know,
How many
it's
of those
great
are
to see.
Hendricks? Like 98 of them that he's given up? Or?
It's great to see these guys come up. You know, I think Thompson and Steele are part of the future of the Cubs for sure. Killian should be as well. And if you just look at those three, I mean, Swarmer, you know, we don't really know what to think of him, and he's been okay, but he hasn't been great. He might come around. He could be like a number 4 guy someday. Who knows? But you know, when we looked at this series and thought about, you know, what this looked like for the future of the Cubs, and that's kind of what I was talking about was, you know, this is really a peek into the future against a team, the Pirates, whose offense is not great. And you felt like this could have been an opportunity to kind of see, you know, these 4 pitchers, or at least 3 of them, come out and really do well. Thompson and Steele did very well. Thompson is 7-2 with a 3.1 ERA, which is awesome. Steele 2-5 with a 4.59 ERA, a victim of really poor defense. And it just kind of feels like, okay, so you've got players out there. I mean, let's talk about Jason Hayward. Let's talk about Jonathan VR, you know, and Andrelton Simmons. You have 3 guys that have no business being on a Major League Baseball team, right? I mean, like, you've got, I mean, there's no redeeming qualities for them at all, and yet they continue to play. And my issue isn't like the purposeful losing that Jed and company appear to be executing on. It's that when you have these young pitchers who are going to be your future, and you're crushing their confidence because you're putting a defense that has no chance in making plays behind. And I'm talking about just bad decision making. I mean, this is like they're making little league mistakes, you know, where they're just making really they're just not making, it won't be an error necessarily, but it'll be like a mental error. You know, like you can see them like not making the throw where they need to be making the throw, and that just basic fundamental things that they teach when you're 10. And this team can't do it. And that's where it doesn't make sense. Like, you would think that you'd at least want to put a good defense behind Steele, behind Thompson, behind Killian, and then see how it plays out, and at least give them the ability to know, hey, the guys behind them are going to be able to make plays.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing, you know. And again, this is something. And when I say we, I don't mean you and I mean we, like collectively, the fans knew going into the season, like when they picked up Miley, you know, they had Hendricks when they picked up, and I mean, Miley is a pitch to contact guy, right? Marcus Stroman, pitch to contact guy. Drew Smiley, pitch to contact. Alec Mills, pitch to contact. Kyle Hendricks, very much. You knew they'd have to have an elite defense. And at the time, now Nico Horner has acquitted himself very well and has certainly erased a lot of doubts about his ability to play shortstop on an everyday basis. But Nick Madrigal is a disaster at second base. Jonathan VR is worse. And Andrelton Simmons, while he can still pick it, and he made a couple of really nice plays the other day, everything that he does defensively is more than mitigated by having like the shittiest bat in Major League Baseball. But again, back to your point, because he could play back there. But the problem is you can't play him because it's not like he's Ozzie Smith. Right, he's not the best defensive shortstop in baseball who's taking away more than what he's giving up as a bat. And so we knew they'd have to have this elite defense behind him. They haven't done it, and that's why it's so difficult unless you're evaluating hypothetically and saying, well, if we had, you know, X, Y, and Z in the field instead of A, B, C, these guys would be better. But that's really not a proper evaluatory technique, right? You need to be able to see what's happening. And if I'm a pitcher, this feels like, I mean, you see this more in youth baseball. I mentioned that earlier, but like, you know, my own son, he's not a big strikeout guy. He can get them, but he pitches to a lot of contact. He gets a lot of weak pop-ups and he gets a lot of grounders. The problem is, you know, at this level of the game, unless you're at a really high level where they picked a bunch of kids up, errors and like bad throws, bad defensive plays will crush you. And so now all of a sudden, as a pitcher, if you're saying, shit, man, if I don't get a strikeout, I can't be convinced that any ball put in play is actually going to be turned into an out. Now, all of a sudden, you're guiding, you're pushing. And I think, as you mentioned, you know, we kind of see that with these guys, and they get a little gun shy. And again, It's by design. The Cubs did not do what they needed to do, and at this point, VR and Hayward and Simmons, the only thing they're serving to do is make the team worse, which, if we look at it in certain terms, is probably what the front office wants. Unfortunately.
But there's only so much. There's only the benefit of being bad. Like, you can't be like, there comes a point where it's diminishing, right? It's like there's no, you don't need to be worse than what you are. Like, the Cubs are clearly bad. They're clearly kind of right in that. What is it? Is it the top 5 are in the lottery?
The top 6 get lot. I mean, every team that's not in the playoffs has a shot at the lottery, but the lottery is the top 6 picks.
Yeah. And so
the top 3 have the highest odds. The top 3 have 15% odds or whatever it is to get that top pick.
Yeah. So it's just I'm just very concerned that if the Cubs trade Wilson Contreras, I don't know what the future looks like. And it certainly doesn't look good for the next 2 to 3 years. And the only way it starts to look any better is if the Cubs sign legit MLB free agents. That's the only way.
They'd have to get a lot of them. Like, they'd have to get a lot of them at this point because they don't have enough guys who are ready to come up and play every day outside of, we don't know what we're going to get from Brendan Davis at this point, right? Because who knows with the back stuff, and he may possibly come back to play this year, maybe. But we're talking about a dude who's missed pretty significant time over the course of his career with a variety of injuries.
Yeah.
And, 2020, obviously he played at the alternate site, but no competitive baseball at all. And so, we would have expected him this year. Now we hope next year. You look at Miguel Amaya, dude has hardly played at all in the last 3 years. And it's just, there are just so many questions there. And you start looking up and down. There are a lot of guys, position player wise, there are a lot of players they've got who I think profile more as complementary pieces. You don't have the same group of going, oh my God, they've got 3 or 4 guys coming up who could be perennial all-stars, right? Hey, do we feel really good about PCA and James Triantos and Owen Casey and all these guys? Yeah, absolutely. But those guys are at A ball right now, right? And we don't know how that's going to continue to play out. And unless they all work out, and that's the thing, right? All of those guys, they had Javi Baez and Chris Bryant and Kyle Schwarber, and all of them hit, as you mentioned earlier, all of them in a big way. And they still were not enough. You still need to add players to that. And unless they go out and spend a ton of money, right, they've got to not only have those players come up, they've got to replace Contreras, possibly Happ, possibly 2/5 or 60% of the rotation, right? I mean, there's so many holes that are there that unless they go out and are they going to just turn around? And Hoyer said he wants that core in place. Well, if you're waiting for the core to be in place before you spend, you're talking at least 2 more years because you don't know what that core is right now. He doesn't know what it is. It's tough. But as you said, right, the really tough part for me is that, and again, I kind of joked about it, although I was partially serious, that having those bad players on your roster makes you worse, helps you get a top pick or whatever. But that's no good for this year, right? It's no good for next year. Why on earth is Nelson Velasquez not playing every day? Just like Chris Morel is.
Seriously.
You need to know if he is a guy or not. Jason Hayward is not. There is absolutely nothing Jason Hayward provides to you on the field. You want him to be on the team and be a leader? Great. Let him be a leader on the bench. He is not helping the team whatsoever in the field, definitely not in the batter's box. Instead of having another one of these young guys come up. Again, we talked about Jackson Frazier. It's not Clint anymore. He wants to go by Jackson. Weird that happened immediately. Somehow nobody picked him up. Somehow he accepted his assignment, which is kind of weird to me. It's really weird to me. Why is he not back? Like, are they waiting for the trade deadline? They hope he sticks around.
Hold on. Let's back up. Clint Frazier suddenly wants to be called Jackson Frazier?
Yes. His name is Jackson is his middle name. Apparently that's what all his family calls him. How this just came out, that Alex Cohen from the Iowa Cubs, I think tweeted that out yesterday. Yeah, he wants to be Jackson Frazier now. But I guess it's like Giancarlo Stanton used to be Mike Stanton for a few years, right?
It's kind of like when I changed my name temporarily, but I'm only a blogger.
But then you changed it back.
Yeah, I had reasons. I had my reasons.
But it's just weird, right? It's weird what they're doing, because this is my problem. You can say, and it's hilarious to me that and I get it. Some people are like, Jed has a plan. I get it. I support Jed's plan. Okay, cool. Because that's what he needs, is for you to carry his water. But the problem is, you can say that, but then look what they're doing. He's got a plan. What the hell is his plan? There's none of the moves they've been making are actually appear to be aimed at helping the future. That's my problem. It's like you're not helping now, which is fine. The ship has sailed on that. They can't be good this year. But what are they doing right now to ensure that core group of players that you have in your organization and will have for years to come is going to be better next year and the year beyond? They're not doing that. And that's the baffling part. But alas.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I hate to use the Cardinals as an example, but if you look at what the Cardinals did, is they added Nolan Arenado and they added Paul Goldschmidt.
Those guys are good, I've heard.
Arenado, probably the best third baseman in baseball, arguably. Goldschmidt, arguably the best first baseman in baseball, right? And so you have two solid players that they added, and then you build around those players. I mean, it seems like the Cubs have Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ, two players that they got in place to be able to do that. You develop these young players that are coming up, like Velasquez, like Morel, and like PCA and all the other guys, Triantos, et cetera, that are down in the minors currently. And then you got at least some hope on the horizon, right? I mean, like, and that's where I come off as like, if you trade Contreras, or if you trade Contreras and Happ, or one of them, or both of them, you're in a position where you've got to go out and get those two players. I think you have to build a team around at least two players who are arguably the best at their position in baseball. Chris Bryant was there. Anthony Rizzo was there. I think you could argue that at a point, Javi was there at shortstop, or second, whatever position he was playing. Yeah. And there were players on the Cubs that you could make that argument for. And right now there are two players on the Cubs that you can make that argument for. But if they trade them away, you've got no players. And so it's like, you have to have those players. And to think that those players are going to come from the minor league system to be the best, arguably the best players at their position in Major League Baseball. I mean, these guys are good, but I don't think they're going to get there in 2 to 3 years. It's going to take longer. I mean, typically to be considered kind of the best at a position, you're usually looking at a guy that's around 30 years old, right? Every once in a while, you got some younger guys that can do it, like in their mid-20s. KB was a younger guy, but typically, and so it's like that's a lot of development.
Yeah, like a lot. And it was, there's been talk out there, oh, maybe they'll sign Aaron Judge because he'll be a free agent. And then somebody's like, Judge isn't signing with a loser like the Cubs right now. And that's where you look at like a Carlos Correa. And yes, we can talk all we want, and everybody's like, well, money talks. Well, yes, and the Cubs have been mighty quiet over the last few years when it comes to that. And yeah, would that be great? Could you convince one of those guys to sign if you decided to give them a huge sum of money and also give out big sums of money to several other players? Like, that's what would have to happen. Aaron Judge isn't coming in like, oh, yeah, dude, I've heard about this Brendan Davis kid. Yeah. Oh, Pete Crow Armstrong. Yeah, man. He was with the Mets. They're in New York. I was in New York for a long time. I heard about that kid. He's going to be good. I'll sign and hope to play with him in 3 years. Like, these players, especially I think if you're coming from an organization like the Yankees, or if you're coming from the Dodgers or something like that, and you're used to winning, you don't want to go and rebuild somewhere. Maybe somebody would, but John Lester was convinced because at the time he signed, the Cubs did have all those guys ready to come up. They did have the makings, and they gave him a bunch of money, right? That was helpful. But as we were talking, I was looking this up. So there are 418 players in Major League Baseball this year who have racked up at least 50 plate appearances.
I want to know where Jonathan VR is.
Jonathan VR is at 401 with -6 F-WAR, Fangraphs WAR. -6, folks. And here's the thing about old Johnny VR with his 66 WRC plus is that he's one of these guys. He has been worse on defense. He is 34% worse than the average run producer, but his defense is actually worse, right? So it's just been awful, and he just doesn't look like he gives a shit out there. That's the problem.
This is a guy who there's no way you can justify being on a major league roster,
right? Because you can't trade him. You can't. Who's going to trade for him? Nobody, because he's not doing it. It's not like he's even out there mashing home. Which at the start of the season, as you probably recall, he actually looked like he was hitting pretty well. Remember, like he's banging the ball over the yard, and now he looks like me when I play softball now, because it's like I used to play short. Now I've had to move over to second base in my older age, mostly because our shortstop's like 25 years old and super athletic with a great arm. But it's like when the ball is hit, if it's hit right at me, it's fine. But if I got a range, I make Derek Jeter look like I make Derek Jeter looks like he's got good lateral movement with the way that I can move to my left and right. It is it's not pretty, dude. And that's what VR looks like. Like he is not moving to the left or the right. And even if it is hit right at him, chances are pretty good he's not making that play. So it is just, boy, it's almost painful to watch. And I can't tell if it's
painful.
Yeah, and
it's not almost.
I don't know how much of it, if we had to break it down percentage wise, like what percentage is ability and what percentage is willingness, and then how much of it's a mix. You know what I mean? Because he's on a shitty team. He's never a good defensive player anyway. So it's kind of like, I'm not giving myself up for this one. I feel like that's kind of the mode that he's in. I was trying to pull this up and see where Simmons, let's check a look at Andrelton Simmons here with his, look at that. He's at 358. So that's pretty cool. The Cubs have two dudes who combine for -9 WAR, and Simmons, maybe you looked at this and you can cheat. You know what Simmons's WRC plus is?
I did not look at that. Simmons WRC plus. I'm going to say 49.
You would be a little bit high on that one. And by high, I mean about 4 times what it really is. He's at an 11. That doesn't make sense. Why would anyone? I mean, you bring up a guy every day of the week to replace a guy like that, no matter who you are, unless you're purposely trying to lose. Right. And for those who maybe, what's WRC plus? It's weighted runs created plus. So it is an all-encompassing offensive statistic that measures a player's run create. So it's weighted runs created. The plus means it's actually ballpark and era adjusted. So you can look at that across different eras. It's on a point scale where 100 is league average. So at an 11, he's 89% worse than league average. And if we look at, again, all players in baseball with at least 50 plate appearances, he is 412 out of 418. There are some who are negative. One of whom is Billy McKinney, former Cubs prospect, who's at a -11. Carson Kelly from Arizona is the worst in the league at -13. But all of those players, right, as we look up and down there now, it's not good, right? Jake Marisnick, Sergio Alcantara. There's a lot of former Cubs. Former and current Cubs are not putting up a very good showing at the bottom of this list. But again, that is someone who, and if I'm trying to look at this here,
where's Hayward at?
Hayward's at -2 WAR. I would have to look at his overall. Let's see if I bring up the Cubs one. Hayward is actually, and he's right there with Frank Schwindel at -2. He's actually got a 64 WRC plus, which
that's good.
Yeah, I mean, all things considered,
Still not going to win you any games.
It's better than Jan Gomes, so we can look at that. But just guessing, do you think Hayward is providing positive or negative defensive value?
I'm going to go with really close to neutral.
Yeah, it's like according to Fangraphs, is a -0.6. But this is the thing. People still think
bad.
like, so Hayward has not been like, he's good, right? He's still a good defensive player. He's got great instincts. He's still a solid athlete. But at 32, right, we start looking at his statistics out there defensively. He's not the premier right fielder he once was. And he hasn't been since his first year in Chicago. If you look at his defensive ratings, his defensive values, according to Fangraphs, at least, we can look at some other metrics too.
Yeah.
He was very, very good, really, for a period of 3 to 4 years there. It was like 14, 15, 16. If you look at that, he was excellent, right? And especially
over a 10
14, 15.
Defensive rating.
Yeah, and ever since then, it has fallen off, and to the point where the last 4 years, I'm looking at these, he's not been above a 2.3, right? Which is, again, you'd have to have a little bit more context, looking at right fielders, whatever. And he's had to play a lot of center in that time too, so it takes that into account. But again, you look at this, he has, last year 0.1 WAR, so he's a negative. He is a replacement level player, right? Well, if you are a replacement level player, that means your average AAA guy could come up and do just as well, have just as much impact on the team. And a lot of them, if they're pretty good, would have a greater impact. And so if you are, and here's the case for Hayward, here's what's wild, right? This is where I come down on it. If he was really, really bad, like Hayward, Simmons and VR bad, then you could almost make the case that, yeah, it makes sense to keep him if you're trying to tank because he sucks and he'll make the team worse. But if you're at just a pretty much a flat, slightly negative value, there's no case to be made for that. You could bring in another player to be worse if you thought this minor league guy is a shitty defensive player, and whatever, and we're just trying to suck. We'll sign some guy off the scrap heap and put him out there. But as it is, Hayward's providing zero value. Oh, okay, leadership. What good does leadership do on a team that's not meant to do anything? If you don't want your team to win, if you're not bringing up the young guys to fill those roles, Brennan Davis being one of them, what purpose does Jason Hayward serve for this team? And he's a great dude. He's awesome in the community. His philanthropy is laudable, and I do believe he's a good leader and a great teammate. People love being around him. But in terms of his value to the team, that sort of intrinsic, that thing is we have what we think could be a very good team, a very solid team, whatever. We need that little extra edge with the chemistry or with the leadership. That's where it comes in. It means nothing on a bad team because it doesn't make them good. You don't have that. That's where that stuff comes in. That's why he was. I'm going to toot my horn. That's what it's like. Even I wrote when they signed him, because I didn't think he was going to continue having the kinds of seasons that he was, and if he did great, but I said he's a glue guy. Even if he doesn't keep up with this offensive, he fits in. He fits their defensive mentality well. He'll come in and fill in some of these little gaps that they have, and not even that he was a glue guy in terms of they put this puzzle together, and he's literally, I have a puzzle I'm looking at here, and it's framed, and I put puzzle glue on it over the top, the clear drying puzzle glue you put on the front and back so the thing holds together so that you can put it on a mat and place it, right? That's what I wrote about Hayward being, was that glue guy that would hold that puzzle together. And he did at the time. The problem is then you took the puzzle out of the frame and started taking pieces apart again. Well, if you're taking the puzzle apart, the fuck do you need glue for? You don't. There's no puzzle anymore. It's just a fucking mess. That's 2 F-bombs in like 10 words.
With glue. And it's all glued together. And it's big hunks of piles of
chunks
puzzle.
of shitty used up glue on the floor. Like, that's what you've got now. And the Cubs are like, man, this reminds me of that puzzle. I think I'll frame
Look, I can
this
kind of
chunk
see
of
a piece over
yeah.
here.
I'm gonna frame this chunk of glue, and I'm gonna keep it, and I'm gonna put it in a place of honor, which is the equivalent of sending this dude out to right field on a regular basis. There's no reasonable explanation for it at all, right? Because you could say, well, they want to honor he's getting paid no matter what. If they get rid of him, they still pay him. They are not doing anyone any favors. They are actively hurting the organization. And I get it. I mean, if he wants to keep playing, but then guess what? If he can't be traded. I mean, he could if he accepted it, but they're still eating that money anyway. If they DFA him, and you've got, then they're paying the contract, right? They cut him, they pay it, they get rid of him. Another team, he goes through, he's not going to accept this. Another team can pick him up, paying the league minimum. And if you can get a replacement player like Jason Hayward, who provides leadership, gives you a decent glove out there for league minimum, hell yeah. I think that might be a decent deal for a contending team that needs that spot, that maybe got somebody hurt. The Dodgers, right? They just had to pick up Trace Thompson to fill in for Mookie Betts, who's hurt. Do you think the Dodgers could maybe use Jason Hayward and have that veteran bat there? And then you're still paying him. You're giving him a chance to go to a contender where maybe he can finish out his career or play another couple of seasons with a winning team that he can provide that value to. He provides no value to the Cubs. They are not providing him with any value other than he's made Chicago his home now and he can continue to play at home. That's it, man. I think it's actually better for him. It's definitely better for the club if they just go ahead and end the thing now, because it is, like I said, it is actively hurting the organization on more than one level. And I hate it so much because I really, really, truly wish this guy's tenure could have been more celebrated for other than kind of, using him as like a mascot in a sense.
He just feels like an anchor
on
the neck.
And that's what sucks is honestly, I think if he's gone, here's the really weird part. If he's no longer playing and they send him somewhere else and he can go play for another team, immediately perception of him changes, right? Because now you can celebrate him as a member of that 2016 World Series team.
It's a locker room speech guy.
Yeah. Rather than this dude who they keep running out there for absolutely no reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I feel like getting rid of him is actually the best possible thing for him in addition to the Cubs. So but that's the one thing that continues to make me super, super angry, because that's where I look at it and say, you tell me you have a plan. You tell us we should trust the direction. I don't believe you have as much of a plan as you want to say you do, because the actions that you're taking speak a hell of a lot louder than the words that are coming out of your mouth, because the words don't mean shit when you keep doing dumb things with your personnel. So there we go.
Yeah. And so the Cubs, they're obviously trying to be as bad as possible this year because they want their odds of being in that lottery to be as high, or to receive the number one pick to be as high as possible. The top three picks have a 16.5% chance of having that number one selection, and then it goes down from there. But every team that doesn't make the playoffs is in the lottery. They just have different odds. And we've seen in the NBA lottery teams with low odds get the number one pick before, so it's not unheard of. So even if you're in the top three, you're still not guaranteed of the first pick. And so that's kind of the danger here. And I think that's what the Cubs are trying to mitigate by being so bad. Is they're trying to say, listen, you can't have a top pick. Is that let me see what the rule is here.
You can't be in that lottery is the top six picks total. You have the best odds at the number one pick, but the top six are subject to lottery. So if the worse you finish, the better chance you have at number one, and then it's top six. And then once those top six are decided, then it goes as usual, reverse order of record. So you could finish
the Cubs
with the worst
cannot
record in the league. Yeah, and they can't be in the lottery 2 years in a row.
That's right.
Because that was the
point I was trying to get to.
Yeah, they pay into the revenue sharing. And so let's say if they were to land the number one pick, now they could still suck again and then say, well, we're going for number 7. But like if you're going to tank for number 7, that's pretty. Which this year works
So the
out pretty
best
well
they
for
can
them.
do if they
Yeah.
end up in the lottery, which is the top 6 picks, the best they can do next year is 7.
Yeah, and at that point, and I put that in the piece today. There is, and here's what's interesting to me though. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, right? So obviously number 1 pick, and here the troublesome part is though, Major League Baseball is such a crapshoot over the NBA and NFL, and then that number 1 pick is not necessarily, nothing is guaranteed in any sport, but it's far less of a guarantee in baseball. Particularly with pitchers and that sort of thing. And then the timeline is entirely different. So even if you get a number 1, number 2, number 3 pick, you're still looking at somebody who, best case scenario, I mean, maybe it's a college hitter and they move through really quickly and you got them up within a year or 2, right? The Cubs were able to do that. And that's really what you need to get. They're kind of lucky this year in that at number 7, they could very well end up with an impact type hitter, perhaps even a college hitter who, again, could move through the system fairly quickly. But by doing that, right, you're still not increasing your odds all that much. It is definitely bigger, and there's a chart in the post today that my quantifying hope piece, if you want to go look at it, that shows the WAR value, like average of by pick, right, and it does it in 5 pick increments, and there is a decided drop off from 1 through 5 to then 6 to 10 to then 11 to 15 and lower. But once you get past the top 15, if you're in the second half, then it pretty much evens out. There's actually better WAR value from like 21 to 24 than there is, or 21 to 25 than there is 16 to 20, which is kind of weird. But it's all really relative. It flattens out after in the second half of the draft, right? And so you do have better odds. Now, these are only numbers from 05 to 15. This is a very recent study, but the reason for that obviously is that you can't judge a pick really you got to wait like 5 to 6 years to really judge these things in aggregate. It takes so long, right? Now, what I'm kind of interested in is how does that change over time? Because now there's so much more data being collected on college players, high school players, youth level players based on the tournaments and things like that. So you're getting velocities and spin rates and exit velocities and different running metrics on these guys to where there aren't as many secrets. And I do think we're actually going to see this stuff. I think we're going to see better success rates for some of those top picks. And I think we're going to see things flatten out a little bit more, though. Possibly. I could be wrong there, but I'd be interested to see where that comes in. And I do think that Dan Kantrovich and the Cubs are good there. But I really, really, man, the idea of tanking for a draft pick in the majors I think it's less a strategy about eventually trying to flip that and become successful as it is having a good excuse to save money and to not spend on payroll because you're saying, I mean, it's a dual purpose, right? But you can use it. Oh, yeah, we're just trying to maximize this. And it is true that you're better off. The worst place to be is in the middle. If you're at the end of the draft, it means you were successful at the major league level. If you're at the top of the draft, it means you should have a chance at a really high pick. And guess what? Your payroll was probably shit. So you could actually get away with not spending as much money.
Is that the Cubs, if they qualify for the lottery at the end of this season, they are going to be in the middle, right? I mean, there's really, I mean, or towards the low end of the top, but basically the middle, right? If you consider the middle to start at 7, right, and go to 24 or 20, whatever, it's a big middle. But at the end of the day, I guess what I'm trying to say is it really seems to me like the Cubs obviously are trying to tank this season. They're not going to be motivated to do the same thing next season, which means to me that they need to have Ian Happ and Wilson Contreras to build around. They re-sign those guys. No, they don't need to re-sign Happ, but if they re-sign Wilson Contreras, they could extend Happ, though. That would be a nice thing to do. And they start to build around those guys. They could still trade those guys at any point in time. Now, is Wilson Contreras' value probably, as high as it's ever been? Yes. But I also think that you could make the argument that they figured out how Wilson fits into a team that has a DH on it, which is going to be everything in baseball, including the Cubs. And so It really feels to me, and if you have Miguel Amaya come around, which that's to be seen, but if he actually steps up and becomes a major league ready player, then you've got a really good young guy that can then be taught by a veteran, Wilson Contreras, and you still have a lot of options. So
Yeah.
I don't think punting on trading Wilson Contreras minimizes their options. The only risk you're running is an injury risk, I think, because you still have the ability to trade him if you extend him. At least you've got those pieces in place to not tank next year. Because the thing is that if they trade Contreras and Happ, it almost doesn't matter who they sign next year. They're still going to be probably right around this bad, right? They're still going to be around 65 to 70 wins at best.
Yeah.
And for what reason, right? Why? And that's where it doesn't make sense.
Do you replace, let's say you trade Ian Happ right now. Do you replace that production next year for anywhere near the cost that you're paying him right now?
No,
anywhere
no
near
way.
it. No. And so that's the issue. Same thing for Contreras, right? You do not replace that with anything close to the low cost. He's making what, $10 million, right? Happ's at like 6 or whatever it is.
And he's going to be more. I mean, Contreras is probably going to be over 20 million AAV, I'd imagine.
But I don't even think if you were able, I don't even think right now you can get those guys. I'm just kind of looking through. Man, I'd like to see Trey Turner. Contreras is 23rd in the league, 2.3 WAR, F4, right? He's way up there. Ian Happ, 2.2, 27th in the league. So, I mean, you're talking about other guys in that category. Tim Anderson, 2.2. Jake Cronenworth, who destroyed the Cubs, 2.2. Francisco Lindor, 2.3, right? These are, that's big time. That's still that's the first page, right? A fan. Now, that's not, Manny Machado's at 4.3. Oh, remember when he was going to suck and the Cubs shouldn't have signed him? Boy, that was a long time ago, huh? And so you don't, if all you're doing, even if all you want to do is just replace, if you got rid of that player, you traded him off, whatever, didn't sign him, just to replace their contribution is going to cost a great deal more than what they cost, period. The idea that you could even improve upon what their contribution is really difficult, if not impossible, right, to be able to do. And in order to do,
and you've got culture fit, too. You've got there's a lot of other variables to take into place outside of just the stats.
The point is that if you lock those guys up, then you've got those holes filled, and they know they've got Yan Gomes for another year. That's a pretty good tandem right now between Contreras and Gomes being able to go every day. You got PJ Higgins in there if you need him. Amaya is going to need at least another year in the minors, but then if he comes along, you're set there at catcher. One way or the other, catcher / DH, whatever you need to move around. Happ is out there. You're set in left field. He's their everyday left fielder. Seiya Suzuki is set in right field. If he ever comes back from an injury that they initially weren't going to put him on the IL for, which is cool. Who cares about Hayward? Morel, I don't think, and then we can talk about, like, what about Brennan Davis? And you can move some guys around, but, like, Morel doesn't need to be the everyday center fielder. He can move around to some places.
You've got enough outfielders out there.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
And that's what I worry about.
You've got Morel, you've got Davis, you've got Suzuki. Happ.
But you need to have those guys there. Like, again, with any of them, we don't know what Brennan Davis is going to be. We don't know what Velasquez is going to be.
Morel can play third. I think he's a natural third baseman anyways, isn't he?
Third, short, second. He can play all over the infield. And it's wild to me that they continue to plug him in center field. Like, why not?
Well, and Patrick Wisdom, outside of the home runs, he's not having a good. He's batting, I think, 216.
Yeah, it's not been great.
The only thing he gives is home runs. There's a guy that definitely needs to go back down to the minors. But
well, he and Schwindel, right? He got real hot again after being demoted for a day and not playing down there. But again, I mean, I think we're seeing, Wisdom. I think it serves the purpose. He'd be like a great DH, and he can pick it pretty well at third. He's got a strong arm, but I mean, it's obvious that neither of those guys were going to be a long-term piece. Just they're on the wrong side of 30. But that's where, to me, I'm looking at. I think I probably said this earlier in the week, but Matt Mervis is a guy at first base. He can pick it over there. He is a big dude. He can mash Mervis. I would love to see him continue to play well and be a dude who they can plug in there at first base for the long term moving forward, because he fits. I mean, he's like 6'4", 225. He looks like a linebacker. And I think he's only going to continue to get. He's a Duke guy too, so he's probably pretty smart. Or maybe just an asshole. Either way, but there's a lot that they could plug some of these gaps. But I think that's the thing, is if you get rid of two guys, now all of a sudden you're saying, well, shit, half the roster is up for grabs. Half the spot. We don't have these cornerstone pieces like they had Rizzo in place right before these young guys started coming up.
Yeah.
And they locked in Dexter Fowler. That was only for a couple years, but still, like, you had these pieces then.
And Javi
was
in place too, right? They had Javi in the system for a while.
Yeah, I mean, he had been in for a while, but I mean, it took him a long time though too, as you recall. Like, he came up, he had to go back down, he got hurt, and then he was over at second base when Russell was up there. So you're kind of moving them, but like those guys who you knew, when you're trying to figure out who to add, right? And that's the problem. So if you're saying, oh, we're going to trade the two known commodities that we have, if we move on from them, now we're having to replace that, because you're talking about two all-star level players. And if those guys are gone, not only does this team suck even worse in the second half, but like, that's what I said. There's no way you suddenly fill those gaps, because why go? I guess here's my other thing. If you're talking about money, the only way to replace them is with money, by and large. Instead of spending on the free agent market for a guy who you don't know how he's going to fit, why not just pay that money to the two guys who are already there?
Yeah, especially a premium position like Wilson Contreras.
Yeah, that's the funny. But I know
a lot that doesn't make sense. Yeah,
a
lot that doesn't make sense.
I don't believe the money will be there to be spent for at least. I don't think this winter. I think next winter, at best, or not this coming, but the following. Because
winter is coming.
Yeah, no shit. They don't know what they have.
Big way.
They do not know what they have, other than a whole ton of questions.
Yes, and there's no clarity on this in the future. But the trade deadline passing and having Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ on the team would gain a lot of enthusiasm from Cubs fans. That's for sure. So if you want to start moving in the right direction, that would be the way to do it. The Cubs play 3 against the St. Louis Cardinals, which, hey, they're probably going to sweep the Cardinals, because that's what the Cubs do. Is they lose to really
don't let Tom hear. He might. I don't know if he can still listen, but don't let Tom hear you say that.
I blocked Tom. Sorry, Tom, you got blocked.
They're just on here. This just blocks him on here, right? Yeah, because Tom's a very frequent contributor, but I think I talked about sense of humor earlier. I think his is perhaps one that did not quite mesh with what we were going for right there. But hey, I at least tonight's game is one of the Apple Plus Friday night games. So if you don't have Apple,
good luck
TV
watching
Plus,
that.
Maybe you don't want to. Honestly, there are certain games where watch this be one of them where the Cubs just trounce the Cardinals.
Hendricks is due for one of his dominating performances, even though he is one of the worst pitchers in all of baseball at 2-6 and a 5.43 ERA. He's going up against Andre Palente, who is 2-2 with a 1.69.
Ooh, nice
ERA. And then TBD and the Cubs. What is the deal with Stroman, by the way? Is he just gone forever?
I feel like man, that dude, between the COVID thing and then did he tweak his back? What happened there?
I know, that's what I'm trying to remember. The last thing, it seemed like it was COVID, and it's like we just haven't heard from him since.
Well, then, because he came back for like
games.
A start.
And then he hurt his pinky. I don't know what it was. There's some stupid small little thing.
But I do feel like that's where it's gotten with this team, to where I'm kind of like, oh yeah, like Drew Smiley, and then I guess Smiley threw a pen the other day. I guess they say he's progressing a little more quickly, which I'm sitting there wondering, like, how much do they go? Hey Drew, you ready to go? How you think you can get a couple starts in before this here deadline? Hopefully, come on, buddy. How you feeling? So because like him and Miley, man, I mean, these guys come up. They're going to have to come back at some point if they want to try to trade them. Now, I'm all in favor of trading Miley and Robertson. I think Robertson's value has plummeted because he hasn't been real good lately. Yeah, and he can't even hit. Jeez. struck out
Jeez.
in his only at bat.
Bum.
How's that going to increase his value?
But the trade pieces that they do have, like Miley and Smiley, for example, all for trading those guys, and everybody except Wilson Contreras and Ian
But
Happ.
who are those guys? Like, here's the thing: who the hell are they bringing back at this point? You know what I mean? Like, who are you getting?
Even if it's like
dudes?
a lottery kind of like prospect, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think it'll be along the lines of probably not quite the Jock Peterson, Bryce Ball thing, but I got to think it's like they probably want to add some pitching, but it's probably a dude who the other organization is sort of given up on. He's plateaued a little bit, and they're probably looking at it saying, oh, well, all right, we'll give you this dude because, I mean,
Change
everything else considered, who knows, or some cash considerations, right? Which at that point, basically, it was worthless then to have signed them, but,
So the Cubs have a TBD on the Saturday game for their pitcher. So I don't know if that's going to be Stroman or who that's going to be. They've got Swarmer slotted to pitch on Sunday against Jack Flaherty, and then they come home to play the Reds starting next week. So it gets a little bit easier, arguably.
Oh, but then it gets real rough in July. July is rough, dude.
Let's take a look. Hold on.
Heading into the break is rough.
Okay, so 3 against the Reds, good. And then 3 against the Red Sox at Wrigley. Red Sox playing better. 3 against the Brewers, 4 against the Dodgers, 2 against the Orioles, who gave the Cubs a hard time the last time they played, and then 4 against the Mets, and then the Phillies after the break, and then the Giants.
Those teams
and then,
heading into the break, those teams are combined, and this is with the Orioles being under 500. Those teams are combined 66 games over. So they're like it doesn't matter, and then is the All-Star break, right? So at least they get a few days off. We don't have to worry about them. But that first half of July is gonna be rough, which is probably just the way your mother likes it, Trebek.
You guys, let me tell you, I was thinking the Cubs would be around 65 wins, and I think they're going to be very lucky to get to 60 wins. Just looking at the schedule and just how we see everything playing out here. This is going to be ugly. This is going to get worse before it gets better. And it's hard for us because it's like we want to be positive, but it's like, what do you talk about during this? You want to, it's great to talk about the performances, but it's hard to talk about, like where we were talking at the top of the hour of, you young pitchers when you don't have any defense behind them. And so it's like, that's not even a comp, right? Like how do you compare them to anything, or how do you say they're improving when you just don't have good defenders behind them? So it just seems like it's just kind of a waste of a year. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, but we'll keep doing it. What the heck? That's what we're here for.
Yeah. And hope there's still some fans left when it is time to be aggressive again. I guess that's going to be the question, right? Jed Hoyer said he's got some questions to answer. One of mine is, when are you going to be good again, dude? Because it's not easy. Somebody had a mean comment to you on one of what he said. Do you think this is hard? Try running a blog. Ooh, it's be easy to run a blog. Ugh. Facebook. And it's like, it's a joke, dude. Calm down. But it does kind of suck because it's not easy to find motivation and things to write about and cover, when it just, because you don't want to really,
when they're not even trying
up everybody's ass. Right. I mean, if they're not trying, like, how can I, because you're being disingenuous if you're out there like just searching for good stuff, and then at the same time, like, it's bad. People don't need to be beaten down with how bad it is either. So you gotta, where can you find some of that middle ground? So it's just, we'll keep trying. Something happens, and I mean, I guess it's better for them to be either really bad or really good, because at least then you can find things to write about in there. If it's just mediocrity, then it's sort of like, oh, well, okay, well, I guess
not trading Wilson Contreras and Ian Happ would at least give me some faith, would give me a little bit of hope, and I think that would go a long way for the Cubs contingent. But we'll see how that all plays out. Until we'll come back, we'll circle back after the Cardinals series, most likely, and hopefully we have something positive to talk about. That'd be cool. So Monday is an off day, so I guess for now we'll plan on seeing you guys on Monday. But until then, thanks for joining us, everybody. It's been real.
Go.